Hello, my name's Ho, Senior Safety Trainer here at Bizhaven. Today, let's talk about the new indoor heat illness regulation in California. This new Cal OSHA requirement is now in effect starting July 23rd of 2024, and employers who may be affected may include warehouses, distribution centers, restaurants, manufacturing plants, or similar indoor work environments where temperatures cannot be lowered to specific temperatures, starting at 82 degrees Fahrenheit or more. These employers will be required to implement new controls in order to protect their employees from this new regulated hazard. Some of these controls that employers will need to implement in order to protect their employees from heat illnesses can include things like engineering controls, admin controls, access to water, temperature monitoring, implementation of a cool-down rest area, employee training, and of course a written heat illness indoor prevention plan. So let's summarize a few new elements to the indoor heat regulation, starting with monitoring, assessments, and cool down rest areas. If one or more of the temperature triggers have been met starting from 82 degrees, employers are required to measure the temperature and heat index and record whichever is greater. Records of these temperatures must be established and maintain accurate records of the temperature or heat index measurements, which can include things like the date, the time, and specific locations of all these measurements. If an employee is observing heat illness symptoms, employers are now required to implement a cool-down rest area that is cooler than 82 degrees for employees to sit down and recover. Examples of cool-down rest areas could include break rooms, conference rooms, or really anywhere else indoors where the temperature is less than the immediate work area and can provide relief to enough employees. It is important to implement monitoring procedures for employees who may be affected by heat illness and emergency response procedures if medical assistance is necessary. This requirement is similar to the outdoor heat illness regulation here. Access to water is also another important element where potable water that is fresh, suitably cool, and free of charge should also be available to employees within a reasonable distance from their work area. Examples of accessible water sources could include things like water bottles, plumb faucets, or water dispensers that can be replenished to provide at least 1 quart per hour per employee. This is another similar requirement from the outdoor heat illness regulation too. In addition to this, other controls that we really need to start implementing, and is one of the most crucial elements in this new regulation, is controlling hazards for employees. Companies can achieve this through engineering controls or administrative controls. The following are some of the examples of these controls that employers could consider. For engineering, we could include things like fans, swamp coolers, misters, improved HVAC systems, isolation of heat exposure to employees, or reducing work intensity or speed. On the administrative control side, we can consider things like acclimating the employees, rotating employees out with their schedule to help reduce exposure to those heat sources indoors, scheduling work earlier or later in the day, and increasing rest break periods in those cool down rest areas. And the last element I want to highlight for the new indoor heat illness regulation will be to develop a written plan where it is accessible to employees. Elements to consider should include things like responsibility, access to water, cool down areas, acclimatization, controls, which can include engineering and admin controls, emergency response procedures, signs and symptoms of heat illnesses, and employee and supervisory training as well. Employers need to consider any affected employees who will be exposed to indoor heat will be required to be trained on this written plan before working in those types of environments. Supervisors and managers also need to be trained on what their specific responsibilities when it comes to this plan, which can include things like emergency response, monitoring weather and temperature, and water replenishment.